The boss's son became the boss and immediately fired me, and later he was fired from the company. When Martin Lantham took over as CEO of Hensley and Dart, he walked into the office like he already owned the place, which, technically, he did. His father, Gerald Lantham, had built the company from the ground up nearly 3 decades ago. But Martin had no interest in legacy. He was here to make efficiency changes. I had been with the company for just over 10 years. 10 years of my life building the client experience team from scratch. I led dozens of contract negotiations, trained new hires, and often worked late into the night, sometimes well past dinner, missing family events more times than I care to remember. But none of that mattered. It was a Tuesday morning when Martin walked into the break room where I was pouring my usual half decaf with oat milk. He didn't say hello. Didn't acknowledge me at all. Just looked at me like I was something that needed to be cleared off the counter. "Elaine, I need a moment in my office," he said. It wasn't a request. I followed him, trying not to let my nerves get the best of me. My hands shook slightly as I clutched my notepad, expecting perhaps a restructuring briefing or some awkward team reassignment. But the moment I stepped in, Martin didn't even sit. "You're being let go," he said plainly. "We're moving in a different direction, and frankly, we don't need people who slow things down." I blinked. Sorry. Could you clarify?" His tone didn't change. "You can clear your desk. This is effective immediately. HR will handle your exit." No explanation. No warning. I had always prided myself on staying composed in difficult situations. This time was no different. I gave him a calm nod. "Understood. Wishing you the best," I said, and I left. My hands were trembling by the time I reached my desk, but I didn't let it show. A few coworkers looked up in surprise. I didn't say a word. I simply began collecting my things, slipping photos and notebooks into a small canvas bag I'd once used for grocery runs. As I exited the building, I felt numb. Not angry, yet. Just stunned. 10 years. I had given more to that company than I'd given to my own health, sometimes even my family. I remembered late nights where I answered calls while helping my daughter with homework, or reviewing a contract while pushing through the pain of a dental procedure I couldn't afford to reschedule. I had been the go-to person for crisis calls, client concerns, overseas communication issues. My fingerprints were on nearly every major client retention policy Hensley and Dart had implemented in the past decade. And I was dismissed like a low-level temp. That night, I barely slept. The whole scene played over in my head again and again. Martin's expressionless face, the way he didn't even hesitate, the way he said, "We don't need people like you." But what gnawed at me wasn't the insult. It was the timing. You see, we were just days away from finalizing one of the biggest international contracts the company had ever pursued. A 6-month-long negotiation with a European logistics firm, Meridian Global. A deal I had personally cultivated from the first introductory call to the latest contract review. I was scheduled to present the final terms that Friday. So why now? Why cut me loose before the ink had dried? Something didn't add up. The next morning, my phone rang at 9:07 a.m. It was a number I didn't recognize. I almost let it go to voicemail. But instinct told me to pick up. "Elaine? It's Gerald Lantham." The voice of the company's founder made me sit upright on the couch. "Good morning, Mr. Lantham," I said cautiously. "I just walked into the office," he said, his voice tight with restrained emotion. "Why aren't you here? What happened?" I paused. I didn't know what he'd been told. "Your son let me go yesterday. Said I was slowing things down." A long silence followed. I could hear papers shuffling on his end. Then a sharp inhale. "He fired you?" "Yes, sir." "Elaine, the Meridian contract. Please tell me you were able to brief him before you left." "No. I wasn't given a chance." Another silence. Then I heard something slam on his desk. "Did he even read your contract?" I frowned. "What do you mean?" "There's a clause in your agreement. A very specific one. After the Bellevue disaster 2 years ago, I had it put in writing. You're the sole authorized negotiator for international logistics accounts exceeding a certain value. That includes Meridian." My stomach dropped. "You're saying he can't finalize it without me?" "Not legally. Not ethically. And certainly not logistically." You built that relationship, Elaine. You're the only one they trust. For a moment, I didn't say anything. Something inside me shifted. I had walked out yesterday thinking I had no power. But suddenly, I realized, I was the linchpin. Martin had acted too fast. Too carelessly. And now the fallout was coming. Mr. Latham hung up without another word. Within minutes, my phone lit up again. First a call from Martin. Then his assistant. Then someone from legal. I didn't answer. Then came a voicemail from Martin. Elaine, hi. There seems to have been some confusion. I may have moved too quickly yesterday. We really need to talk. It's time sensitive. Please call me. No apology. No accountability. Just urgency. I sat back on the couch and watched the phone light up again. Another voicemail. Then an email. Then a message from my old colleague, Connie, who had moved to another department but always kept an ear to the ground. You're not gonna believe this, she whispered over the phone. Gerald just called Martin out in front of half the executive team. Asked him one question, did you read Elaine's contract before you let her go? And Martin, he tried to bluff. But Gerald wasn't having it. Flipped straight to the clause. Told him if this deal collapses, so does his promotion. I didn't say much. Just listened. By 11 a.m., a direct message from Gerald came through. Elaine, I owe you an apology. Please consider returning, not just for the contract, but for a private conversation. I didn't respond immediately. I wasn't ready. Not until I knew what I wanted. And I had every intention of making it clear, this time, on my terms. By the time I replied to Mr. Latham's message, the dust at Hensley and Dart hadn't settled, it had barely started to rise. I wrote simply, I am open to returning for the Meridian Global negotiation under specific conditions. I'd like to meet privately with you before re-entering any formal role. He responded within 20 minutes. Agreed. Let's meet today at noon. My office. You'll have privacy, and my full attention. I didn't wear my old badge. I didn't walk in through the employee entrance. I wore a navy blazer I hadn't put on in months and walked straight through the front lobby like a consultant, not a staff member, and every head that turned to look at me knew it. Some looked surprised. Others awkwardly turned away. Connie caught my eye from the third-floor landing and gave a small nod. The receptionist, Carla, who had been there for years, rose from her desk as soon as she saw me. Miss Franklin, Elaine, she said, her voice a little unsure. Mr. Latham is expecting you. I followed her through the corridor I used to walk a dozen times a day, but this time, I felt none of the old familiarity. This wasn't my office anymore. Not yet. Gerald Latham stood at the door to his office, not smiling, not cold, just composed. Thank you for coming in, he said. I stepped inside. He closed the door gently, then walked to his desk without offering a seat right away. There was a folder waiting there, but he didn't open it. I made a mistake, he began. And I want to say it plainly before we get into anything technical. I waited. I should never have given Martin that level of authority without checks. I thought it would challenge him to rise to the occasion. I didn't expect him to light fires before learning to build anything. He sat down, motioned for me to do the same. What he did to you wasn't just wrong, it put the entire Meridian partnership at risk. And to be honest, if they walk, we lose a gateway to half a dozen other expansion initiatives. All because he didn't read the contract. I nodded. I'm not here to gloat, Mr. Latham. But I'm also not here to return quietly and pretend it didn't happen. You shouldn't, he said. And I wouldn't ask you to. I leaned forward. If I come back, just to finalize this deal, I want it in writing. I want authority over the negotiation process, including direct client communication, and I want zero interference from Martin. I want the right to step out the moment that boundary is crossed. He didn't even blink. You'll have it. It's already drafted. He slid the folder across the desk. I opened it. The language was clear. Direct. Watertight. And after the deal? I asked. He hesitated, then said, that depends on what you want. I want a conversation, I said. Afterward. Not about job titles. About how this company treats people like me, who do the work, quietly, consistently, and still become disposable the moment someone new wants to prove they can shake things up. He nodded. You'll have that conversation. I stood. Then I'll finish what I started. By 1:30 p.m., the boardroom was prepared. The Meridian team had arrived, and they were exactly as I remembered them, punctual, detail-oriented, observant. Mr. Gerard Lemoyne, their executive director, gave me a surprised but pleased smile when I greeted him in French. You remembered, he said. I never forget who keeps their word, I replied. I didn't see Martin in the meeting. But I did catch a glimpse of him pacing outside the frosted glass wall, as if hoping to see something fall apart. He didn't come in. And when the deal closed, 2 hours of smooth negotiation and final clarifications, I shook hands with Mr. Lemoyne, and the relief in his expression was as real as mine. After the Meridian team left, Gerald returned to the room. He didn't say much. Just this: you saved us. That deal will define our next 5 years of growth. I didn't reply with anything flowery. You owe your people more than a thank you. You owe them protection. Structure. Leadership that doesn't confuse recklessness with initiative. He didn't argue. I gathered my documents, thanked the executive assistant, and walked out with my shoulders back. Martin was at the end of the hallway, mid-conversation with someone, but his voice trailed off when he saw me. Our eyes met briefly. I didn't break stride. I didn't look back. And for the first time since that chaotic morning in the break room, I felt something solid beneath my feet again. By the following week, the Meridian deal was being referenced across the industry. I didn't expect public recognition. I didn't need it. But internally, things began shifting. My inbox filled with subtle notes, thank yous, congratulations, quiet acknowledgments from people who had stayed silent the week I was let go. One read, "We saw what happened. Thank you for coming back anyway." Another, from a junior associate I had mentored, said, "You've given me hope that this place can still be worth it." I wanted to believe that. But I also knew better. Culture doesn't change with one deal. And when the small red flags began appearing again, I recognized them immediately. A delayed expense reimbursement. A calendar invite mysteriously disappearing. A spreadsheet revision missing key data, something I knew I had submitted. Then a message came through from a foreign partner. Their legal team had received a misdirected update that included the wrong figures. Supposedly from me. I contacted IT. They investigated. The message had been sent from inside the office. Logged in under my credentials. And that's when I knew. Martin wasn't finished. He'd tried removing me. That failed. Now he was trying to unwrite me. Sabotage in slow motion. After the forged message was confirmed to have come from within the building, something inside me settled, not in comfort, but in certainty. This wasn't paranoia. This wasn't a misunderstanding. Martin was trying to erase me from within. I'd seen this kind of corporate quiet war before. Years ago, at my first job, a talented colleague had gradually been nudged out. Not through formal write-ups or official reprimands, but by being excluded from meetings, passed over for input, and quietly blamed for delays she didn't cause. Back then, I was too junior to intervene. I wasn't now. This time, I wouldn't disappear. I began keeping a private record. Every time a document went missing, I made note. Every time a calendar invite was mysteriously altered or a client email was rerouted, I logged it. Dates. Times. Screenshots. Witnesses. I also began sending more of my communications with a colleague CC'd, discreetly building a web of visibility that could be cross-verified. It wasn't about revenge. It was about proof. I knew I wouldn't get another second chance to protect my credibility if things spiraled again. And then, one afternoon, I heard something I wasn't meant to hear. I was walking past Conference Room B, one of the smaller glass-enclosed meeting rooms often used for strategy huddles. Martin's voice, unmistakably sharp, filtered through the glass. "She's not stable," he said. "She's defensive. Difficult. Since she came back, it's like she's out to prove something instead of doing her job." I froze in place, just out of view. Another voice, softer, male, responded, "But she just closed Meridian. And from what I've seen, she's got the whole client services team actually functioning again." Martin scoffed. That was luck. We can't run a department on luck. Look, I'm not saying we do anything dramatic, I'm just saying we should consider transition planning. She's clearly not built for sustained pressure. I stood there, expressionless. Not angry. Just sure. He wasn't going to stop unless someone made him. And this time, I wouldn't wait for permission. That evening, I stayed late in the office. The halls were mostly empty. I sat alone at a shared workspace near the back, where the floor-to-ceiling windows gave me a view of the city skyline. Behind me was the quiet hum of printers and routers. In front of me was my notebook, and a decision. I had enough data now, enough inconsistencies, false attributions, and redirection tactics to at least raise formal concerns. But I didn't want to lodge them the usual way. I wanted to go to the source. So I typed an email, not to HR, but to Gerald Lantham. Subject: Integrity Concerns, Confidential Discussion Requested. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't emotional. Just a careful outline of what I'd experienced and observed since returning. I attached timestamps, included a few key examples, and signed off with: "If the goal is to preserve the culture you built, I believe now is the time to decide whether accountability applies equally at the top." He replied before 8 a.m. the next morning. "Come to my office at 10:30. I want to hear everything." When I arrived, Gerald wasn't behind his desk. He was standing near the window, hands in his pockets. "I've read your email twice," he said. "And I want to tell you something before we go any further." I waited. I suspected something was still going on. But I didn't want to act without being sure. That's why the audit committee was never fully disbanded after Ryan's departure. My eyebrows lifted slightly. "You kept it active?" "In a limited capacity." Quietly. "And I'll be asking them to review this material today. No delays." "Should I speak with them directly?" I asked. He nodded slowly. "Only if you're willing. You're not obligated to. But your voice would matter." "I'll be there," I said. "I need this to be faced head-on. No more behind-closed-doors strategy talks about me. If someone is building a case to discredit me, I want the chance to face it." "You'll have it," he said. The meeting took place the following day, in a conference room that looked more like a forensic lab than a boardroom. The audit team, 3 people I'd worked with briefly in the past, had been quietly compiling activity logs, system entries, and access logs since the Meridian negotiation. David, the lead internal auditor, gestured for me to sit. "Thanks for coming in, Elaine. What we're about to show you is part of a larger timeline we've been reconstructing." He pulled up a set of logs. Every questionable action, an email forwarded without my knowledge, login attempts from shared computers, modified attachments, was linked to one of 3 user accounts. And one of them was Martin's executive assistant. He wouldn't have had access to do all this himself, David said. But someone with admin access and a bit of coaching could have made these edits and attributions appear routine. I stared at the screen. "And the motive?" David hesitated. "We can't confirm it, but the timing matches internal conversations about organizational restructuring. And we found 2 drafts of emails written from your address that were never sent, but saved to shared temp folders. One of them includes erroneous financial figures. If those had been sent..." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. It would have looked like I was misrepresenting data. And it would have justified quietly pushing me out, again. "Who else knows?" I asked. "As of this morning?" "Just you, me, and Gerald." I nodded. "Then I want to be present when you present this to the board. I won't be a ghost in this company." David looked at me for a long moment. Then said, "All right. Let's do it right." That night, I didn't sleep. Not from fear, but from focus. I reviewed everything again. Checked timestamps. Labeled screenshots. Prepared answers to questions I hadn't even been asked yet. The old version of me, the one who kept her head down and waited for recognition, was gone. In her place was someone who had learned the rules, watched them be twisted, and now intended to unbend them. The board convened on a Monday morning. Early. Quiet. The executive suite was closed off to general staff, the blinds drawn, the room dim except for the soft glow of a digital projector displaying audit logs, access patterns, and flagged activity. Gerald sat at the far end of the table. The auditors sat beside him, aligned and focused. I took a seat closer to the middle, across from an empty chair that would soon be filled. 10 minutes past the hour, Martin walked in. He wore confidence like a blazer, but his eyes flicked toward me with hesitation. He hadn't expected me to be there. "This isn't standard procedure," he said immediately, gesturing toward me. "She's not on the audit team." Gerald didn't look up. "She's here at my request." Martin's mouth twitched. "Then I'll have my counsel review. There won't be a need for legal posturing," Gerald said, still calm. "This is an internal findings review. You'll have a chance to respond, but let's begin with the facts." David took the lead. One by one, he presented the timeline. Suspicious logins. Draft emails never sent but intentionally saved in shared folders. Mismatched metadata. Calendar events that were deleted without notifications. Reimbursements delayed through rerouted authorization. All tied to accounts managed by or directly reporting to Martin. With each slide, Martin's posture shifted. What began as a practiced smirk turned into silent jaw tension and darting glances. Finally, David paused. "We also found conversations logged between Mr. Latham and one other executive, referencing Ms. Franklin in a way that suggested an intent to remove her reputation as a decision-maker rather than simply address performance concerns." Martin leaned forward. "Hold on, you're interpreting context out of frustration. I never ordered anyone to sabotage anything." "You don't have to use the word," I said calmly. "The actions speak for themselves." He turned to me. "Elaine, I never meant for this to become personal." "But it was personal," I replied. "The moment you targeted my credibility after I saved a deal you nearly lost. You weren't trying to protect the company. You were trying to rewrite the narrative." Martin opened his mouth. But nothing came out. Gerald finally broke the silence. "I had hoped," he said slowly, "that you'd learn from your earlier mistake. Instead, you dug deeper." His tone was measured, but colder than I'd ever heard. "This company was built on trust. You don't have to be perfect to work here. But you do have to be honest." Martin's voice cracked for the first time. "Dad, this isn't personal," Gerald said, with finality. "It's about integrity. Yours has been compromised." A motion was made. The board voted. Martin Latham was officially dismissed from Hensley and Dart. No headlines. No grand gesture. Just an exit card and a short email to department heads, effective immediately. "Martin Latham is no longer affiliated with the company. We thank him for his time." The building felt different that afternoon. Lighter. Not celebratory, but clearer. Conversations in the halls returned to their usual rhythm. People spoke with less caution. There were smiles again. A few even came by my office with gentle taps on the door, offering quiet nods and thank yous. Some hadn't said a word to me during the weeks of tension. I didn't hold that against them. I remembered what fear could do in an uncertain workplace. Later that week, Gerald called me in once more. He didn't have a folder this time. Just a conversation. "I've given this a lot of thought," he said. "And I'm stepping back from daily operations in the next quarter. I'll stay on the board, but this company needs someone who understands what leadership actually looks like in today's world." I was quiet. "Elaine," he said, "I'd like you to take on the role of Vice President of Client Operations. You've already proven you can carry us through storms. Now I want to see what you'll do in calm waters." I didn't answer right away. He waited. "When I came back, I made a promise to myself," I said. "That I wouldn't stay unless I could be part of real change. Not just in title, but in culture. If I accept this, I want to build something healthier, systems that support people, not just performance. A place where someone like me would have been protected without needing a crisis." He nodded slowly. "That's exactly what I was hoping to hear." In the months that followed, I began reshaping not just my department, but how we worked together across the company. We launched anonymous reporting channels that were actually reviewed. We established clearer policies around internal promotions, conflict resolution, and digital accountability. But I also made time for people. I held open-door hours. I sat in on onboarding sessions. I reached out to employees who had left during Martin's tenure and asked, candidly, "What pushed you away?" Some were too hurt to answer. Others told me more than I expected. And every piece became part of the puzzle I was determined to reassemble. Because I knew something now. You don't fix a company by changing a logo or issuing an apology. You fix it when people at every level start to believe that doing the right thing will be recognized, not punished. A few seasons passed. One afternoon, I walked past the same glass-walled conference room where the Meridian deal had been signed. I paused. Not because I was dwelling, but because I had changed. That room no longer held the memory of panic. It held proof that I didn't win by fighting harder. I won by refusing to be erased. By choosing my dignity over silence. By remembering that real strength isn't loud. It's consistent. It's deliberate. And it never, ever waits for permission. Thank you for watching the video. Like it if you watched the video to the end and don't forget to subscribe. Have a nice day.